Except I didn't get any things ready to talk about.
That's all right. So this is something, I don't know if I talked about this in the audio that I sent you, but this is what I sent to Jeff and Sarah, is that I'm increasingly concerned about probably the Paul Vanderklay tribe being taken over by the whole thing that I mainly spend my time critiquing.
Mm-hmm.
The rationalist kind of ideologues who the people in your Tolstoy quote.
Yeah. Oh, that was the Dostoyevsky quote.
Or Dostoyevsky, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, baby, now my family's coming home. I should relocate. I'm going to relocate quick.
Do it, yeah.
Hey, that's why I love you. I got to go relocate because I'm talking to someone. Okay, you can give me a hug.
This is going to be for some good Randos.
I'm talking to Mr. Julian. He's down here. There's her head. Oh.
And Papa,
right.
Mama was super nice. Mama was super nice and let us get a water bottle.
The thermos?
And this.
Oh, and some Tic Tacs? It's crazy. Okay. I'm talking to Mr. Julian, so I'm going to go this way, okay? Hey, you goofball. Tell Mama that I'm on an internet call. Sorry.
Well, on this notion that you have rationalists taking over the channel, what is some evidence you might have for that, or
so it's not
cause for concern?
Right. So it's not. Sorry. It's not evidence in and of itself. It's more just a spirit of. And I've heard Paul talk about it recently a few times. Can you still hear me well?
Not really, but put them back in, and then it'll pick you up better.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's much better.
So I've heard Paul bring this up a few times recently. And I mean, he's done it Paul really is kind of a wizard of
unification.
Wizard in a positive way, of talking to the most eclectic, diverse range of people that he can, and creating a space where people really open up. It's almost, it really reminds me of, so I don't know if you watched, how much of you watched of that, A Hidden Life, that new Malick movie that's coming out. Did you watch the trailer?
No, I didn't.
Okay, well, you should. But then also the press conference afterwards is something that was repeated a lot within the conversation about it, was because the movie is essentially about a German or an Austrian, I suppose. I'm not sure of where it lies out during World War II or in the lead up to World War II, who essentially just wouldn't go along with Hitler. And it's about kind of that really, I mean, it's about all the Solzhenitsyn stuff, that fine line of just the quiet resolution where he's just like, I can't and I won't go along with this. Oh, sorry, pause quick. I just started this conversation. You guys just came home. So is that all right?
Okay, that's fine. What should I do? Or what's the story?
It's in the oven. The
What
food.
is?
The beef stroganoff stuff.
Okay. When will it be done?
It's
What
done.
should I do?
It's in the oven.
Ready?
It's ready.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if there was a time.
Oh.
You know, like
Right now's the time. Okay. I had to feed my family. Sorry, she was wondering about where the He's like, "Where's the food?" So a lot of the movie is about just this guy's silent life, and then you hear in the press conference, and he and his family, is that. So the first question in the press conference, which I love, was that this show's about heroism, and so the questioner says, what is your view on heroism? And the main actor's response is, this movie isn't about heroism. It's about a quiet, hidden, silent resolution that this person had, that he wouldn't disobey this feeling of what was right within himself. It wasn't a heroic act. It was a very silent, seemingly inconsequential act, because that's a repeated line throughout the film, that the Nazis are questioning him, like, what do you think you're accomplishing? Do you think you're saving the world in like just not going along with this, essentially? But I think it touches on this. This is why Malick is so genius, is that it strips away all the ego, all the grandiose kind of trappings that we have in our fantasies about what it means to do the right thing, and it makes it this very humble, honest, authentic commitment to the truth, to being honest, to not lying, to not, and it's all incredibly beautiful, and I think it's going to be a very compelling film. And Malick is a genius, and so I would go see it just for that. But I think it's connected to all those things, and so. Okay, connect me. What were we talking about right before this?
So we're talking about, the spirit of Paul's channel and how you think it's going in a certain direction.
Yeah, and so I think Paul is very. Another factor of that film that they bring up in the press conference is this guy's resolution to do what he felt was right, but in the same time being non-judgmental of anyone who did anything differently. Mm-hmm. Like it wasn't about judging or making a show of it or doing anything. It's just like, I can't do this. I can't go along with Hitler. Mm-hmm. And so there was this strong component of non-judgment. And I think this is the connection. That is what Paul is very great at. He's not he's not judgmental at all. And so it really, I mean, this is a classic psychoanalytical technique that psychoanalysts use to get people to delve into their shadow. Is you have to have an environment of complete non-judgment for people to say what they actually think. Mm-hmm. Otherwise they won't do it. And I think Paul is very good at that. And I think like his recent talk with Sam is a perfect example of that.
Oh, yeah. That conversation in itself could open up some great topics for us.
Oh, it's so good. But what's telling to me is that bothers a lot of people. Mm. And that is a perfect example. That's a perfect illustration of my concern is the people that it bothers are ideologues, whether or not they know it. And they're not, and I feel like, and this is my whole point, is I would argue those kinds of people are the danger. Not the people who not the Sam who thinks he believes in Unitarianism for whatever that's worth and however that plays out. This is why I think the Jordan Peterson mantra of tell the truth or at least don't lie is so important. It's not about this is where Kierkegaard is important. It's not about primarily this external set of orthodox doctrine and this hierarchy of things that's imposed externally. That can't ever be irregardless if it's right. That's not even my point. You're gonna create inauthenticity, which will eventually bleed.
Untruth.
Yes, yeah. Which will eventually bleed into and manifest eventually into a culture of the whole thing that I'm talking about.
You're concerned about participatory knowing, in a sense.
Yes.
Right? You're concerned about getting people's beings in order, right?
Yeah.
How are we relating to the truth?
Yes.
This is actually one thing this brings up for me is Kierkegaard's attack on Christendom. One of his mantras was that the Christianity of Christendom is not the Christianity of the New Testament, and he doesn't want people, like, what he was demanding is not burn the whole system down, change everything. what he said, it was, what I fundamentally want is honesty. I just want you people to admit you're not living and acting in the truth, and that you're trying to hide it up. And I think the big thing that triggered his attack in Christendom for him was, when the bishop of the Church of Denmark or Copenhagen, I'm not sure, is a guy called Bishop Minster. He died, and then his successor to be, there was this guy who was sort of positioning himself to become the next bishop, and he gets up on the podium at his funeral and delivers this rousing speech about how Bishop Minster was a defender of the truth, and that he's part of this long line of apostolic witnesses stretching all the way back to the apostles. And Kierkegaard was just completely outraged by this, because it just wasn't true in his mind that he was a defender of the truth, that he could be called, that he could fit into this line of this great succession. So what he was after was honesty. And I think that's what I hear you saying is, we want people to be able to be honest, be honest about, how what they actually believe, be honest about how strong their commitment is, be honest about how good a Christian they are, or how bad an atheist they are, or whatever it is. Yeah. That's the kind of conversation that's going to bring us somewhere.
Right, because that's very in line with what Paul will frequently say, and this is flowing from Jordan Peterson, but we aren't transparent to ourselves. Yeah. And so if you don't allow a culture of authenticity and honesty, it's like you've undercut your own means of ever getting there. It's like you've hobbled yourself at the beginning of a race, and you can't ever actually accomplish it. And that's my big concern, is for all these people that are so, and what's hard, like this is what I'm eager to talk to you and Sarah about.
Keep going. Sorry.
No, this is what I'm eager to talk to you and Sarah about with ritual and liturgy and things. And this is what I've even come to the realization over the last few days is I feel like I'm finally shedding, like Eustace in the Chronicles of Narnia, more layers of my own rationalism. Because I realize, like, I've been trying to rationally convince people of this for like the last 5 years. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
You can't do it. You can't, and I've said this, like I tweeted this years ago, you can't show a rationalist why rationalism is irrational. You can't do it. And so, like, what are the ways, what are the mechanisms, what are the rituals that we can practice, like that can get us into that kind of existential humility where we
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, where we don't think that where we drop the monarchical vision. And like what I think the thing that people so often miss, and this is what I'm so often accused of, is like, well, I'm pro irrationality, or I'm against logic, or I'm against reason. No, it's never been the case. It won't be the case, but it's a limit. Like in the last, and I don't know, you probably haven't seen this yet, but Michael from Paul Vanderklay's channel, he spoke with Mark Vernon. Did you see that video?
I saw it, but I didn't watch it.
Okay.
I would like to watch it.
So at the end, I mean, I like Michael, and I've had a few conversations with him, but at the end, Mark Vernon said, the whole conversation's pretty good, but at the end, Mark Vernon said, the whole point of reason is to point beyond itself. And if it doesn't, it becomes, it's like the snake eating its tail. And he says, you end up sacrificing the capability to know outside yourself. And he's like, you submit yourself to this mechanistic knowing, in the Vervaeke terms, the mechanistic versus the intuitive knowing. And what that does is that kind of knowledge automatically disconnects you from reality. That's the problem with modernity in the West, is it divorces you. That is the meaning crisis. It divorces you from the world. It's like that guy who spoke to Paul recently that talked in Hawaii. Do you remember him? And he talked about going up in the telescope and seeing the rings of Saturn. You remember the guy talking about that?
No.
It's one of the last few conversations, and he says he just started weeping uncontrollably. And I was just like, yes, 100%, this is like Lewis in the Space Trilogy. He was reconnected. Like he was reconnected with the world, and whether or not he could articulate all these things, he was re-engaged. When he went outside of the light pollution in Hawaii and he saw Saturn, he saw the rings, he was automatically reintegrated with the world, and his physiological response was to just weep.
Okay. Yeah. Oh boy. So that's just triggered so many different things.
Go.
So here's a place to start. So I was on the Discord channel today, and this guy wanted to talk about Dostoyevsky, and he says, I don't see too many conversations about Dostoyevsky on this channel, and it would be great to start some. And I said, I've read some of Dostoyevsky. What do you think? And then he made this comment that for him, reading Dostoyevsky has had the fundamental change in how he saw the world. Just reading Dostoyevsky, just suddenly everything is different. And then he said he's become interested in orthodoxy through Dostoyevsky, and he goes to his priest and he says, I've become interested in the church through Dostoyevsky. And the priest says, Dostoyevsky might be one of our biggest apologists. And then he started this conversation about persuasion. And then he says, what's the difference between Dostoyevsky as a persuader and William Lane Craig? And what's the difference between their approaches? And it's such a fascinating question for me.
Yeah.
Because what Dostoyevsky does is his approach is non-coercive. It's creating an imaginative image, a mode of being for which you can enter and then see the world through these eyes. And it's a brutally honest vision. It's never, here's a rainbows and unicorns version of Christianity. No, it's Christianity that reaches all the way from heaven to hell. Yeah. Right? It shows all the depths of human existence, and it struggles, and it's authentic, and it's true.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of vision that's going to draw people in, one that that explores all of human experience, and brings it into the realm of participatory knowing, and into the realm of lived experience and lived reality, because that's fundamentally what Christianity is about. It's about the transformed life. And I think the best argument for Christianity is a transformed life or a transformed community. It's not the cosmological argument or whatever.
The embodied Christ versus the abstracted Christ. I mean, the kind of like the filling out of what's lacking in Christ's afflictions, or being mystically his body on earth now. That is what affects people. Effects with an E, not an A. Like, that is what changes people. A confrontation with that. And that's not abstracted, disembodied ideas in and of themselves. It's the lived reality. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I think
all its ugliness.
Yeah, for sure.
And suffering and pain, and I mean, lived reality is brutal. It's not fun all the time.
And so this gets back to my. So I do want your thoughts on this. This gets back to my concern with Paul's channel. Is this community going to become just more ideological tribalism, and fighting essentially that Dostoyevsky crime, the crime and punishment thing that you sent me. Is it gonna be more of that, or is it going to be some means of a redemptive use of technology contra technological babble that somehow redeems things and allows us to then integrate and participate into these things in an embodied way, in the kind of way that a Dostoyevsky novel does? Because those kinds of things are not integrated into your local community. I mean, that a Dostoyevsky novel is a form of technology, right?
Yeah.
It's a book. And so are these conversations gonna enable us, because of the conversations that we're having, into a further form of participation that awakens us to new imagination?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they going to just rekindle the kind of tribal Christian bickering that we've been having, I don't know, for thousands of years, over ideas and about who's right? Because if that's what Paul's channel turns into, like, I don't want to do it. Like, I'll check out pretty quick.
It's one thing that strikes me about Paul's channel is how there seem to be different conversations going on, where you'll have a certain circle of people who will sort of draw out, the elements of Paul's channel that focus on consciousness and embodiment and a ritual and the meaning crisis and modernity, and we'll just suck out these. And then there's a different element who will be really interested in, Paul the pastor, and they'll just watch all of his sermons and be really interested in practical Christian insights and these types of things. Then there are there's the maybe the more rationalist types who will sort of, I don't know what they exactly get out of it, but they have sort of something different, something different that they suck out of it. They're much more interested in, the Paul's comments on, young men maybe, or the meaning crisis in general, or what are the types?
Hey,
or just conversations on Christian theology and these types of things.
So here I want to tell you just a little illustration and story as a way of illustrating something about what you just said.
Okay.
So one of the podcasts, I don't listen to it regularly anymore, but I like it just because I like the guy. So Dax Shepard, he's this Hollywood celebrity. He's married to Kristen Bell, who's like she's Princess Anna in the Frozen movie. Anyhow, and he's this Hollywood celebrity. They're married, they're a celebrity couple, but he started a podcast, and it's actually a pretty interesting podcast. They actually talk about a lot of psychology, and it's actually really intimate and really personal. He's a recovering alcoholic and addict, goes to AA all the time. So there's actually a lot of really interesting, they actually talk about a lot of Christian stuff all the time, although he would say that he's an atheist and not religious. But this just occurred to me the other day, is one of the things that he will often talk about on the podcast is how just different in perception he and his wife are, because he grew up in a completely different environment than her, and he is highly cynical, highly subjective, he's always looking out for the person that's trying to take advantage of him. And so he says, to illustrate this, he says what will often happen is he'll be approaching someone on the street with his wife, and he says he's thinking in his mind, like, look out, this person's about to jump me. Like, what is this person going to do? Pretty soon they're about to jump me, And he says simultaneously his wife is thinking, like, oh, I wonder who that person is. They might cure cancer. and he uses that kind of as a humorous way to illustrate differences between he and his wife. But what I find funny is he is a self-avowed atheist. He loves Sam Harris, right? He thinks the world is full of facts and objects. he doesn't believe in this kind of Barfield perception, different things. But yet, in this very story, he illustrates the fact that we are observing the exact same phenomena, the exact same thing. I take it to be threat. She takes it to be potential miracle.
Yep. Yep.
And it's the exact same. So like he knows that his self-acknowledged worldview is wrong, but he doesn't know it. You know what I mean? He knows it deeply because he's telling you a story about how it's wrong. But yet he'll say, like, I think the world is facts and objects.
Yeah, I think that illustrates one of the differences between, maybe the William Lane Craig and the Dostoyevsky thing, where, Dostoyevsky is very interested in, I can come up with three differences. So Dostoyevsky is interested in honesty. This is human experience. This is suffering. This is death. This is struggle. This is unreconcilable. This is paradox. This is mystery. William Lane Craig is about, certainty and fact, and this is what makes the most sense, and this is the most probable, and this is the most objectively true. And if you believe this, everything will fall into place, and these types of things. So he's much more interested in a coherent, well fleshed out system. And then Dostoevsky is also aware that, as Paul says, we're not transparent to ourselves. So he's aware that he has conflicting desires, that he has, this sadistic person inside of him, and this happy person inside of him, that he's a conflicting counsel, and that he's not sure what he believes, that he has this atheist side and this Christian side, and that everything is mixed together, and different elements come up and come down, and that he has to deal with that. And then someone like William Lane Craig is much more sure of what he believes. Like, my beliefs form propositional truth claims that I can prove with facts and evidence, and I'm sure of all of this, and this is what I believe. And doubt is just me not being sufficiently convinced by the arguments. But I'm fundamentally, this rational person inside of my head who's looked at the arguments and come to my conclusions. And then maybe the third difference is, to William Lane Craig and to Dostoevsky, there's a different conception of the world. For Dostoevsky, the world is mysterious and paradoxical and far beyond our ability to comprehend it. It goes beyond the world of objects who can look at and point at. It's wrapped up with human subjectivity. It's filled with inexpressible mystery. But for William Lane Craig or maybe someone like Sam Harris, it's, fundamentally we can figure it out because the world is made up of objects and we're dispassionately looking at them. And, this is straightforwardly a cup. And if I look at it, if I look at the world, I just see the world as it is. There's no thought of salience, and,
there was a, it's funny to me. I'm seeing more, I feel like this is a very Jonathan Pageau thing, but I'm seeing more and more people's inconsistencies in their belief in their purported worldviews. So like even I was watching Rogan today, Joe Rogan, talk with Jim Gaffigan, who's another famous comedian. And they were talking about how Jim Gaffigan was talking about touring through Europe and seeing all these different, World War II monuments and things and situations, and realizing like, oh, it's not just because they were talking about the current culture, and they were saying essentially that like these aren't. We can look back at that and say like, oh, those are the Germans. But he said, what's crazy is like, it's not, it's just people. He said, these are just your neighbors that you were hanging out with 2 weeks ago. And then, and now you're just moving into their apartment because they've been sent off to like a camp. And he said, those are just regular people that are doing that. And then, so they're talking about all this reality, which is true. And then Rogan says, this is why and then he starts to go into his very Steven Pinker, like, this is why we just need to be, reasonable and love and and talk about these things and have open dialogue. He went into the very like Steven Pinker humanist. This is why democracy is so important. I don't know if you saw recently Peugeot made a video kind of critiquing Steven Pinker's
I want to watch that.
kind of, modernist enlightenment. We just need to be reasonable and we just need to love each other. And but it's essentially it has no grounding. It has no basis. It's just, and like Peugeot tries to illustrate, is that the problem is that these things aren't all inclusive. Like you can say like, well, we just need to keep being reasonable, but people aren't reasonable. He's essentially saying what you're saying is that we are all human beings are a combination of all these things. Like you have to incorporate within your paradigm that people are reasonable and also unreasonable. And if you think, if you're just advocating for this system, this intellectual system where reason is at the top and we all just need to be reasonable and logical and things, I think it's grossly naive because you're not taking into account all sorts of things. Like the fact that you can be reasonable is because you're living in a very comfortable society. Like this is the thing I was just telling my wife because I watched with her last night the trailer for A Hidden Life, this guy who goes off to the camp. And I said, what's so terrifying to me in a sense is I realize like the exact same thing would happen today. Like we live in this world of everyone who thinks that they're heroes and thinks they're the good guys, but no one would behave like this guy today. All these people would become the Nazis.
Yeah.
And we think we have it all figured out, and I'm just like, that's scary. That's what's scary is the people that don't, that think they would, that think apart, I mean, and this goes to the conversation I want to have more in depth with you and Sarah, to like how this is men with chess. We don't have substantial enough liturgies to train us to behave in the kind of ways that we ought to behave under duress. We don't. Our society would collapse because it's all bound up in our rationality and our reason, and because we have the right ideas and because we're in the right camp. That will disappear in a second under actual pressure.
Yeah, this makes me think of Kierkegaard and the crowd. How we just like to find our identity in, and maybe this is a critique of liturgy and as all we need. One thing I'm often thinking about is, what are the liturgies we are being formed by in modern day society, and how are those structuring our perceptions and our behavior, and the need for counterculture liturgies. But are those even enough? I mean, I think at some point you fundamentally have to go beyond reason and take that leap of faith where you decide that you're going to follow your internal compass, the truth that's within you, the voice of conscience, the way.
You're
going to follow that, even if it takes you to places you don't want to go.
I think that's true. I mean, that's probably that internal compass is and I know how that sounds to the me of 10 years ago. I know how that sounds to people that come from cultures in which I was raised, but I do think that there is that internal voice that isn't like the fickle kind of, Lewis talks about this in Space Trilogy. It's not the fickle, voluble self, which is your chatty voice that's inside your head all the time. It's like the deep, it's like what Jordan Peterson talks about, like, yeah, I think it's what he's trying to get at when he says, don't do things that make you feel weak. He says there's that inner voice that, like, that's telling you to do what makes you feel strong.
And
It's what makes you feel unified, in Peugeot's terms. It's what doesn't
yeah.
dissipate you. It's what brings you together.
And I've experienced this. Like, this is where we get to the limits of rationality, because it's actually your rationality that is trying to tell you not to listen to that little voice inside your head, right? It's your reason your chattering little rider who's trying to come up with reasons for why you shouldn't do the right thing.
It can be, for sure. Yeah.
Looking for rationalizations for why you should take the easy route, why you shouldn't do what you darn well know you should.
Right. I mean, that's kind of my question to the people. I mean, like, that's ultimately, it's just like, because that's the thing, is really like our consciousness Congress is, the truth is we all have a myriad of voices in our head. And so, like, even grant someone like their idea of reasonable rationality.
Mm-hmm.
Which voice do you listen to? Which one's right? It doesn't work. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it just doesn't work. And
it doesn't work when you set it against the Nazi death camp.
No, I don't think it would, because at the end of the day, it matters, like, it matters what you do, not what you think inside your head or what you say. How you act in the world is what matters. And so that's and I don't know, this is where I'm probably gonna take off quick, and we'll just cut it off. And I want to talk more, but I'm gonna go hang out with my family. And
here's a challenge to end things, maybe.
Okay.
How do you reconcile this notion of not judging with sort of the perception that there are, the perception that there is such a thing as being ideologically possessed, or a rationalist, or that there are false modes of being? I do think there should be a room there must be a room in a kind of honest, open conversation for people who are ideologically possessed. Ultimately, what we want is people who are ideologically possessed to join open, honest conversations, because that's the only way to reach them.
Yeah, but I think the way to reform people who are ideologically possessed is what Paul's doing. I think that's how you ultimately can reform people that are ideologically possessed, is you talk to them and you listen to them, and you don't. I mean, I think Paul is discerning in when he challenges people. Like, I've had conversations with Paul where Paul will call me out sometimes on things, or he'll push back on stuff. But I think partially that's because Paul knows that I'm okay with that, and that from people that I know aren't ideologues, I want that. I mean, if I think that you're pushing back on me, but you're not really listening to what I'm saying, then I'm going to get mad at you. But if you're doing that in a genuine way, like, I'm very eager to hear that kind of stuff, because I don't trust myself any more than I trust. I could list a bunch of people from Paul's channel that I have respect for, like Job, Jeff, you, Sarah, Michael. I mean, all these people that I've interacted with a number of times. I trust you guys just as much as I trust my own head, I would say, to a large degree. I mean, I don't think I see anything any more clearly than you guys do. I think that's the way that we're meant to be, is I think that allows for the logos and dialogue and dialogical conversation to be what it's meant to be, is to realize, like, that's when you're truly having open conversation. When I'm telling you what I think, you're telling me what I think, I'm honestly listening to and appreciating what you have to say, and we're challenging each another back and forth, but in a non-judgmental, non-tribal, non-combative way. Like we're for each other. I mean, that's in the in the simplistic sense, that's where like safe spaces are kind of a good thing, because there are certain people that I have a conversation with. Like I have a conversation with you. Not for 1 second do I think that I've never thought you're against me, that you're not trying to hear what I'm saying. I've never felt that from you. I have felt that with people in the comment threads of Paul videos. Like I'm just like, you're not trying to understand a word I'm saying. And like, so what is the difference between those things? Like, what is
just to throw out something quickly, like in a sense, the ideologically possessed who will critique even the idea of a safe space are in a permanent safe space, because they've created this ideological box where anything that threatens them is sort of put into a category where it can be quickly dismissed.
It's off limits. Yeah.
You know, yeah. I think that's why the whole idea of open conversation in a real sense, where you legitimately try to understand what the other person is saying instead of throwing these packaged lobs back at each other. Yeah, they're in a permanent safe space.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, this is the last thing I would say, and you can say whatever. You can have the last word, but I think, Paul, I am perceiving in my self-proclaimed shamanic instinct that I think Paul's channel needs to move more into the arena of personal story, of anecdote, of like applied practice of all this stuff that we're talking about. Because I feel like if it doesn't, it's gonna get caught up into the, I don't know. I'm fearful of it getting caught up into the kind of religious conversation nonsense that doesn't benefit anyone, that a lot of the church has been doing for hundreds of years.
Yeah. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just an intuition.
We'll trust your shamanic instinct here, Luke. You're the shaman of our little tribe.
Yeah, well, I'm not. I mean, Nick is a heck of a shaman too. My wife was making fun of me. I say shaman. I don't know. I keep pronouncing it different ways, and my wife was making fun of me earlier. So here's what I want to do. So since we did record it, I mean, I think everybody should just. I think whoever is having these conversations, put them up. I think we should be putting up all these conversations on the Rando channel. I mean, why not? Who cares? If people watch it, great. If not, who cares?
Yeah, I guess that I think that's a great idea.
So I'm gonna. I mean, I don't know. Since Jeff started it, I'm gonna send it to him, and if he wants to post it, cool.
Okay, I'll go subscribe to the Randos channel.
You should. You haven't yet? I mean, there's good stuff on there. Jeff and Job and I had a book club. It was awesome.
Oh, I watched part of that. I just loved how honest that was.
Yeah, those guys, I mean, that's why I love Jeff and Job. I mean, those two guys are just like, I think their baptismal saint name should just be Ernest 1 and Ernest 2.
Yeah.
I mean, those guys are fantastic.
I see what you're saying.
So, all right. It was good talking to you. I'm going to go talk to my family.
Yeah, you're doing that.
All right. We'll talk to you later, Julian. Bye, buddy.
Bye.